I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today.
I'm really excited about today's show. Unfortunately, Renee Williams, co-host, could not be here today. She's on assignment, but she'll be back with us next week. But today we've got two new guests, and I'm really excited about both these guests. One is a person who used to work here at the University of Kentucky a number of years ago, and one is a county ranger that's working up in Northeast Kentucky. So we're going to be talking about woodland tax tips today. If you're a landowner and you've got any questions about taxes related to your woodlands, you're in good shape because we've got an expert with us today, Dr. Tamara Cushing. She's from the University of Florida, but in a previous life, she was working here with us. So I'm so glad to have Dr. Cushing back with us today. She's an amazing resource when we're talking about taxes and all things related to woodlands. So get your questions ready for her. And we also have Mr. Nathan Hall. Nathan is a county ranger with the Kentucky Division of Forestry. He works up in Northeast Kentucky. And not only is he an all-around great guy, but he is one of the people that's out there trying to help keep our woodlands safe when it comes to wildfires. So we've asked Nathan to come on and talk a little bit about the spring fire season, and we'll get some information for Nathan. So if you've got any questions about fire here in Kentucky and or taxes, we've got it for you today. So if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat pod and we'll try to respond to those. And if you're on YouTube, thanks for joining us, and we'll try to get to you all as we can. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started with Dr. Tamara Cushing. Welcome.
Hi.
So glad to have you with us today. You know, I know we've known each other for a long time, Tammy, and I really am so appreciative of you. I know you're a very busy person. You teach and cover things nationally, not only in the state of Florida, but we're so thankful to have you spend a little bit of time with our folks here in Kentucky and talking about woodland tax tips. It's becoming the season, right? We're in the season of that.
It is definitely tax season. It is always a pleasure to talk to folks back in Kentucky.
Yeah. Oh, well, you've been around the state a number of times. I remember you being out on woodland owner short courses with us. We even brought you back a couple of years ago to do some estate planning and stuff. So maybe we'll have to revisit that again in the future. You did a really good job trying to help our landowners here in Kentucky. And it's always a pleasure to work with you. But again, we are in tax season, you know, and people are always having questions. And it's funny, you and I and Nathan were talking before the show started. And Nathan was talking about some of the stuff that he hears out there in the woods and with landowners and the forest industry about taxes. So we'll see if you cover all those. If not, I've asked Nathan to kind of chime in at the end and see if there's some things that he's heard on the streets or in the woods that you can maybe help us with. But Dr. Cushing, thank you again for being with us. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to you and let you get started.
That'd be great. Thanks a lot, Billy. So let me get this thing fired up, see if we got this all worked out. And you confirm you see that, Billy?
I got it. You're good.
Awesome. Thanks so much for all the help and the introduction. So good morning, everyone. It is definitely tax season. We're definitely in the throes of it. So lots of questions are coming up right now. So the presentation I have for you today is a really brief overview, but I'm trying to hit some of the things that I think are super important for you to know as you think about going into this tax filing season. But even if none of these issues apply to what you did last year, hoping that some of these tips will help you going forward in the future years when some of these issues may come up. And I will say kind of on the outset here, that one of the biggest issues we face is that because this is kind of a niche area, a lot of the tax preparers are not aware of some of these provisions. So don't be surprised if you go to a preparer and they've either not done something I tell you, or they push back if you bring something up that I tell you. I'm always happy to talk to a tax preparer, push them to the correct tax code provision so they can look it up for themselves and kind of be that kind of liaison between some of the tax preparers and the landowner. There is a language to this, right? There's a language that we use in forestry. There's a language they use in taxes. And I view my role kind of as being that liaison in those two lingos, if you will. So let's get started today. If I can get the tax, there we go. So quick disclaimers for you, because I have to do this. This is educational in nature. So I'm not a tax preparer. I don't do this for a living. I teach for a living. So today what I'm going to give you is the best information I can and try to make this as simple a topic for you as possible, understanding that it's very complex. This is high level. It's going to rely on a lot of details, and I just can't cover the details today in the time allotted. I could do this in hours on some of just these topics. Sometimes the answer is that it depends. Sometimes the answer is it depends on how risk averse you are. Sometimes the answer just depends on a lot of little details. And again, the tax code often like weaves upon itself, and they'll use a section in the code and they'll say, it's for farmers, and I have to go over to this other code section to see if forestry is a farmer under that particular provision. So a lot of it just depends on things. And then of course it's based on what I know today. Things could change tomorrow. I don't think they're going to. I think they're pretty busy on some other issues right now, but there are opportunities for things to change. So be aware of that. All right. So starting right off the gate, I think it's really important for you to know your classification for tax purposes. Knowing that classification is the key to your ability to treat losses and to treat different expenses. So let's talk about what these categories are. Again, super high level on this. We can talk about whether you're in the business, whether you're serving as an investor in forest land, or whether this is really kind of a personal use property, or worst case, well, both of these are bad cases, a hobby. And so let me just draw a line between the first two and the last two. The first two really are you in it for a profit, right? And so people that are in a business, right? If I open a coffee shop, I'm not doing that for charitable reasons. I'm trying to make money and I'm trying to turn a profit on it. Same thing with your forest land. If you have forest land and you are trying to make money on it, even to make it even clearer, if that's your only source of income, then it can become more obvious that you're in it as a business. And somebody that's in a business is going to treat it that way. They're going to have books related to that, right? They're going to, by books, I mean, they're going to have accounting kept like they're in the business. An investor kind of is along the same line of thinking. They're in it for a profit, right? Nobody buys stock just to have fun, right? We buy stock with the intention of it making a profit. And so an investor wants to make a profit on it, but their level of activity is different than a business. Their knowledge is different than a business. Just overall, how they treat it looks a little bit different. And that's not always the clearest line. So I don't want to imply that it is. Those other two categories, the personal and the hobby. Somebody with personal use, they have trees, they cut them down, and maybe they make a cabin on their property, or they have trees and they cut them down and they burn their own firewood, right? So use it for fuel on their own property. That's very different from those other two categories. And of course, a hobby is someone who owns the forest land, and really their entire use of it is recreational pursuits or family gathering place. Within that business category, we have two other subdivisions that matter, whether you're active or what we call material participation, and whether you're passive. That's also going to restrict your ability to deduct expenses. So if you're in the business and you don't materially participate in it, it's treated like a business, it's managed like a business, but your activity level is pretty low, doesn't rise to a level of activity that we would consider material participation, then your losses are going to be restricted. So we're going to look at everything. There's some categories, some lists of all the things we consider. So it's frequency, activity, what your intent is. And at the end of the day, we're keeping track of hours, but it comes down to facts and circumstances a lot of times. You document your activity, but even though you may not hit the number of hours, we look at what a normal person in your circumstances would do that was growing trees with a profit intent and say, does this look like what we would consider normal for a forest landowner growing trees? And it's all relative. So there you go. There's your first, it depends. So then we want to talk about properly classifying your sale proceeds. This is something that I see happen incorrectly more often than I would like. And it comes down to how your timber has been sold. If you sell it on the stump, then clearly we're going to get better tax treatment on it. If you bring a logger in, or you cut the timber yourself and sell the logs, that potentially opens up a whole nother category where you might be paying taxes at the ordinary income and the capital gains levels. And the other extreme is if you cut it yourself or you sell the firewood, it's going to be considered ordinary income. Why do we care about any of that? Part of this is how long you've held it as well, right? Sorry, back up for a second. How long did you hold it? You want to hold it for at least a year to get capital gains treatment on it. But the reason it matters is this differentiation between capital and ordinary income. They have different rate structures. The capital gains rate structures are much more favorable than the ordinary income levels. Ordinary income tax rates can go all the way up to 37%. So imagine that on your timber sale, those dollars that are earned on that versus capital income, which can go anywhere from 0% all the way up to 20% for the top earners. So you can see that big difference in the rate structures. And then of course, if you file your timber sale income as ordinary income, you're also triggering a self-employment tax. That's another 15.3% tax that you're paying in addition to those higher rate structures. So that's really not a good thing. I have had people tell me it's all okay. It got filed as ordinary income and they think that was a good thing. That is usually not going to be a good thing for you. It's going to create a whole lot more taxes for you. If that has happened, if you say, oh my gosh, my account filed it that way last year, you can fix this within three years, right? So we can amend tax returns up to 3 years. All right. The next piece of the puzzle you really want to know is what your basis is. So basis just very simply is the amount of your investment in a capital asset for tax purposes. And that's a lot of words to say, if you bought it, what did you pay for it? Okay. And the land and the timber are going to be considered a capital asset in that they're income producing property. There's a little bit of nuance to it. If you go to a tax preparer, they're going to say, well, it's not a capital asset. It's treated like a capital asset, and that's something that only an accountant is really going to fuss with. But just know that by definition it isn't, but we have a way to get us there. If you purchase it, it's your acquisition cost. If you inherit it, it's the fair market value date of death for the most part of those assets. So we would need to know what that looks like. Even if it came out of a trust, which avoids probate, we're still going to look at the fair market value date of death. If you plant the trees, the cost of the stand establishment is what's going to go in the basis account. Okay. And there's a way around that. But for the starting point, we're going to say that whatever it costs you to establish that stand, other than your own labor will not count in this. But if I pay somebody to plant it, I pay for the trees, all of that is going to be in my basis. And then, of course, if I get it through a gift or exchange, there's a whole bunch of different ways that is looked at from the tax code. And I'm going to tell you for purposes of today that accountants know how to handle that. Tax preparers know how to handle that. What's that basis for those particular cases? Timber isn't a special case for these situations. Why do I care about this basis? Because we're going to take that number and we're going to split it out between the land and any timber that's out there, any basis, any buildings that are out there. And then within the timber, we're going to split that into any merchantable timber, stuff I could harvest right away. And that what we call pre-merch, the stuff that I couldn't get paid for right away. And so we're going to split the dollar amount. If I bought it, I'm going to split that acquisition cost among these different accounts. And I'm going to hold that like in a spreadsheet, if you will, or QuickBooks, whatever you use. And we're going to recover that at the time that we actually have a harvest. Okay. But what I need to do is establish that number at the time of acquisition. So if I bought it 5 years ago, then I need to get those numbers established as of 5 years ago. So if I didn't write these numbers down into my spreadsheet 5 years ago, then today I'm going to sit down and say, what was that worth when I got it 5 years ago? Okay, so there's no increase for the fact that values have gone up in the last 5 years. That doesn't matter. What the tax code allows you is your basis as of the day you got it. Okay, so we're going to look back on that. If you haven't split it out, you might need some help doing that. I've got some video resources available for you to look and see how we're going to do that. But for today, just know that you want to know your basis and you want to split it out among the assets as of the time you got it. That number doesn't stay static. If I add anything that I'm not allowed to deduct, then I'm going to increase my basis account by those capital expenditures. And then if I have a sale, so I'm down here in Florida where we grow pine trees in rows. If I did a thinning a couple years ago, then I'm going to subtract the dollars out at that point. I'm going to use that to offset my income. I'm going to decrease my basis account for that dollar amount. And then what's left is what's available for the next time I do a timber sale. Okay, so that number is going to go up and down depending on additions and subtractions that you've done on your property. All right, next, we want to decrease your sale proceeds. So this is why I need to know that basis, right? I'm going to take my sale proceeds. I'm going to take any sale expenses. So if I paid a forester to mark the timber, if I had to go through I needed some legal help to do the contract, those sale expenses come out of the sale proceeds. And then I'm going to take what we call depletion. Depletion is just a fancy way of talking about how I recover my basis. So if I do a partial sale, I'm going to take part of my basis account. If I cut everything out there, then I'm going to take all the dollars out of my basis account. What's left is my taxable gain. So that's all the legal way that we're going to reduce the amount of our sale proceeds. So again, depletion is a recovery of your basis for your timber, recovered in proportion to the amount of timber sold. We calculate it for each timber account that we have. So if I have split out the timber on my property into hardwoods and softwoods, then I might have two basis accounts that each account would have its own depletion calculation going on. And all that is the dollar amount that's in the account divided by the total volume of timber out there at the time. And that's going to give me the dollar per unit that I can recover. If this is going fast, I apologize. It is fast. I'm trying to get as much to you as I can, but I'm going to give you some resources at the end. You can go watch entire videos that talk about just this process. All right. This is one I want you to really, really remember if you've done any reforestation work or what I'm going to call afforestation work, which is just taking land that maybe was in pasture or was in crops and converting it over into forestry. All of those types of expenditures related to reforestation or afforestation are relevant for the tax code purpose of being able to deduct outright expenses of up to $10,000 per qualified timber property per tax year. So every tax year, this is available. I can, if I did site prep last year, I can take up to $10,000 worth of expenses and deduct those. And then if I put the trees in the ground this year, I can deduct up to $10,000 of those expenses. And I can do that for each qualified timber property. And that's just a little bit of a tricky concept, trying to figure out where the line is on a qualified timber property. But, you know, easily, if you have a property in Kentucky and you have one in Florida, we'll call those two properties. You can do two of those accounts in the same year. If I have two tracts that are side by side, but I've kept the books separately and I've kept management plans on separately, then I can probably go ahead and call each of those a qualified timber property. So again, this is one of those, it depends. What's the definition here? Whatever goes over $10,000 on that property within the tax year, I can amortize or write off over the next 7 tax years. It's done kind of gradually. I will tell you that if you sell the property on which you've taken these expenditures off within the first 10 years of taking that expenditure, then there's going to be some recapture, some penalties imposed on you for any tax gain that you were able to capture. So if you wait 12 years after you do reforestation, then you won't have these penalties kick in. Best advice I can give you is to straddle tax years with your operations, kind of like what I said, right? In 2021, I might do site prep, and in 2022, I'll do the planting. That would give me that straddling and allow me to do the up to $10,000 in each tax year without having to worry about running over. We want to deduct expenses if possible. If you're in a business, you can deduct all your ordinary and necessary expenses incurred for production or collection of income. If you're an investor, you can deduct expenses associated with production of income. That's management and conservation or maintenance of property. But here's the real problem. Back at the end of 2017, we suspended the miscellaneous itemized deduction category, and that was where investors were taking off their expenses. So You could still deduct your property tax if you itemize there was a separate category for that. If you don't, otherwise, you're just going to capitalize all these expenditures. And we do that through a process called carrying charges. So they would ride along until the time that you harvested. Obviously, that's not optimal, but that's what we're left with the suspension of miscellaneous itemized. And then, I told you the bad word. I thought hobby expenses are not deductible. So that's why we do not want to be in a hobby category. You all are sitting up there in horse country. The horse industry is part of why we see these hobbies kind of targeted because people were raising horses and then deducting all these expenses with no income. And so that is what kind of put that in play. And unfortunately, some forest landowners look like they're doing something similar, even though they may not be. Almost done here, Billy, I promise. Casualty expenses, casualty events. This is damage or destruction or loss of timber resulting from a single identifiable event that is sudden, unusual, and unexpected. So let me make this like really obvious to you. We're talking about an event like, imagine a hurricane, right? So the hurricane comes up the coast and it hits Louisiana and it snaps the timber. The tree is dead. Okay, so you've had a sudden loss of timber at that point. And it was unusual in that it's not normal for it to hit that particular area, even though it might hit Louisiana. It doesn't hit that particular location in Louisiana. And it is unexpected in that it's not something that happens every year. We know that this is going to occur. This typically is hurricanes, tornadoes, these unusual wind events. Ice storms can qualify under this. What doesn't qualify, and I see Dr. Ellen Crocker on here, is pests, right? So insects and disease issues are not sudden events. They don't kill the tree suddenly, they kill it slowly over time. Deductions in the case of a casualty event are limited to the lesser of the timber's decrease in fair market value or what's in your basis account. That's why knowing what's in your basis account is important. If you took reforestation and had nothing in your basis account, then you do not have a casualty loss. I know that's disturbing to people. I've talked to people in Oregon through fire season, and they don't have anything left to deduct. But the IRS looks at it as you had nothing at risk. If it's personal use, if it's your yard trees, it has to be in a presidential disaster area, and there's additional limitations on the amount. Again, this is a whole webinar series, webinar event on its own. And then if you salvage your timber and you actually incur a gain, the gain is taxable, but we do have ways to defer the gain. If you have other income, you get money through cost share. Just know that cost share money is considered taxable income, but there is a way to exclude it. I have some resources you can look at for that. If you have a hunting lease income is considered ordinary income. You do have to pay taxes on it. And then goodness, the newest thing on the street is carbon payments. I would love to tell you that I absolutely knew the answer, have taxes on carbon. I'm not completely sure. There's some things that we're thinking about that matter in this. I'm going to tell you to check with me later, and that I have a webinar that I gave earlier this year that I do a whole bunch of it depends for about 45 minutes that I can direct you to. Finishing up here, keep good records, right? A journal, a ledger, an accounting program, keep all your receipts, your invoices, sale documents, 3 years minimum, because you can fix things other than the reforestation expenditures. You can fix all of that within 3 years. You can amend your return. If you mess up on the reforestation incentive, you have 6 months from the time you file your return to fix it. Otherwise, it's going to be capitalized. Any capital expenses, keep your receipts. That's your trees, right? Keep your expenses and your receipts until you sell the asset, and then an additional 3 years. I told you I had some resources for you. Tax Tips for Forest Landowners 2022 is out. I hope Billy has those resources available for you to find those. The Hardwood Timber Industry Audit Technique Guide. If they are coming to audit you, you got to pull that guide up. It's on the internet, written by a forester who worked for the IRS, but it's what their auditors look at before they come out. The Forest Landowner's Guide to the Federal Income Tax. You see that image on your screen. We are in the process of updating it. We've been working on it for 2.5 years. So hopefully we'll have that in time for next tax season, but the guide that's out there right now is still a really great starting point for you. And of course, this time last year, we were in the throes of a Woodland Stewards tax webinar series that UK participated in as well. Those have all been recorded and are freely available for you. All right, Billy, that was about as fast as I could cover taxes.
Wow, you went around the world there really quick, Dr. Cushing. And you may have just saved people thousands of dollars right there with your words. So
I certainly hope so. I don't often hear those stories, but I hope that I'm saving people before the mistake happens.
yeah, no doubt. I know it can be so complex. And, one of the challenges, especially like with our hardwoods up here, is these timber sales and some of these activities are much more infrequent, right? Where you live in pine country, you all are always kind of doing something in the woods. Ours, it may sit for a little while. So being able to hear this and relate that to our situation, I really am appreciative of. You did have one thing that you brought up that I was unfamiliar with. I had a question how it might apply here in Kentucky. You talked about different timber accounts. And I was wondering, would that apply to like our stands? How we like manage different units in Woodland differently based on, their characteristics and our goals for them and the composition and all that stuff, right? Should our landowners be breaking up their property into these stands and that are then timber tax account or basis accounts, I guess is my question.
Yeah, so great question, right? So ready? It depends.
Of course.
So absolutely. So with the caveat that you can get out of control on this, right? So let's just think for a minute, right? So I'm sitting there in Kentucky and I've got some beautiful hardwoods, and then I've got this bottom, right? That maybe the quality is not so great, or maybe the quality is fantastic, but there's no chance I'm ever harvesting that, right? Because logistically I can't get in there. No loggers going in there. No logger who's been through your top logger, your master logger program. They're not going in there, right? And so what I can do is I can separate those things out any way I want, right? There doesn't even have to be a justification. It's just my decision how to separate that out, right? So, but if I have 5 acres, that's not very smart, right? Because I got to keep those accounts up, right? Somebody has to. Or if I go to an accountant, I'm paying them to keep up with that. So think about it logically, like what makes the most sense? If I have 1,000 acres, you need to be splitting that out, right? So far, like even if I think about in Florida, I would tell someone with 1,000 acres, you could split that by age class. Right. So in Kentucky, I might think about my really high quality stuff, my lower quality stuff, because then I could put more dollars on the high quality that I'm probably going to harvest sooner, right, and less dollars on that low quality, so that I'm not too worried about it. It could be that it's one county versus another. It could be I've got different objectives in these stands, so I want to split them out. But remember, all of this costs time and money, and so just make sure it makes sense.
Yeah. There's so much to think about, and it has big implications as far not only on your wallet but also legal ramifications doing it this way.
Right. And Billy, I'll also say I've seen people not split it at all. They just do a kind of a blending of everything in together, and then when they start harvesting, they're like maybe it's the high quality stuff they're harvesting, but because it wasn't a lot of acres, they're using a blended depletion unit to pull it out. Yeah. Whatever works for you, just have it all documented.
Right. Yeah. The proof's in the writing, right? I guess you got to have it documented well. Yep. We'll open it up if we have any other folks out there with questions. We have a lot of county extension agents that participate in this program, Dr. Cushing, and they interact with our landowners daily, right? They're out there meeting with them and talking to them all the time. So, I guess, do you have any kind of quick thoughts that that we might, as extension educators, how can we kind of help our landowners out there that may be dealing with this kind of even be aware of all these different issues and, broach that conversation a little bit?
Absolutely. So, that tax tips is a great thing to have in your pocket, right? So you could just hand that to a landowner, right? And that's what they're produced for. It doesn't go into a ton of depth, but what you just saw, I developed that PowerPoint off of kind of looking at what we did in the tax tips, right? So how could I boil all of that down? And then you're just shooting them to another resource. I was talking to some consulting foresters earlier this week, and I told them, I'm not trying to make you a tax preparer. I'm not trying to make you me even, right? I live this stuff. What I'm trying to do is make you aware. So when a landowner says, you know, man, planting costs a lot of money, you could say, well, you know what? I think there's a way that you can reduce the impact of that by some tax provisions. We should look that up, right? I'm always happy to help landowners. I get a lot of questions I field from around the country. More than happy to answer a question, shoot them to another resource. You know, that's part of the beauty of recording a lot of these presentations, is that people can look at it, slow me down, speed me up when they don't want to listen to me, and then look things up and then talk to somebody else about it. You don't, as an agent, need to be giving tax advice.
Right.
I don't give advice. I just want to make awareness of these provisions. And of course, landowners not using these provisions is not only bad for them, it's bad for the industry as a whole. When Congress and the people that are doing all the homework look at the use of these provisions and see nobody's using it, then why are we griping and they take it away?
Right.
So the last thing we want is them taking this stuff away.
That's a really good point, Dr. Cushing, and maybe one folks didn't think about. We did have a question. Somebody has a smaller tract, perhaps 40 acres. Is this still, all of what you're talking about, does this still kind of make sense for them?
Yeah, so I hate to say it again, but it depends. And the reason I say it depends is if I was sitting down here in Florida where our prices aren't that great, and let's say it was pulpwood stuff, right, on pine pulpwood, it's not, maybe 40 acres will make it economical, maybe it won't. You know, maybe it's a break-even deal and they're just happy to pay the property taxes on it. In Kentucky, I don't know what the high value product is right now, but you know, maybe it's
White oak.
It's oak. So, you know, maybe it's oak, right? It's white oak for barrels,
Yes.
right? So if we've got white oak, and it's good quality white oak, then absolutely, right? So unfortunately, it depends.
Sure.
Somebody the other day said, can you tell me like a threshold? I'm like, there's no threshold. You have to pencil it out and see. This question was about like, do I go backwards and try to figure out my timber basis?
Right.
Maybe. It
Right.
depends what somebody's going to charge a landowner to do that versus
Sure.
what the tax benefit is. And it just has to kind of be penciled out rough and then figure out what the difference is.
You know, you bring up such a good point there. It's just so complex. There's just so many different factors and no case is exactly the same. So to be able to give a stock answer is just really impossible. So
Right.
I know it can be frustrating for people, but I think it's important they understand just that complexity.
It's frustrating for me. I hate to tell people it depends.
Right. I know, because everybody wants just the easy answer, right? But
I love
unfortunately,
an easy answer.
life is not too easy. With Dr. Cushing, I cannot thank you enough for all you've shared. And I mean, I'd love to have you here all the time, but I'm sure your administrators in Florida may not want you up here in Kentucky all the time, but we'll have you anytime you can get up here. I know you've got a lot of great expertise and knowledge. You're a wonderful educator. You know, you were actually the leader of our entire Society of American Foresters at one point, you know, our president a few years ago. So thank you really for all you do. And I will let everybody know that those tax tips that Dr. Cushing was speaking about, I will be sending those out in a big e-news that we've got coming up here in the next couple of days. So you should see that real soon. And we'll have those posted on our website as well. So Dr. Cushing, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Billy. I appreciate it. Anytime I can get back up there, I'm happy to help.
Well, you know, the great thing about the virtual technology, we can have you here in Kentucky today, and you're speaking to many county agents and landowners across the state, and you'll continue to do so through our YouTube channel. So thank you very much.
Thank you. You have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Very good information, folks. I hope you listened to Dr. Cushing and got something out of it. If you missed any of that, we will have these recordings available soon, so please make sure to check them out. We may try to include some extra links there that Dr. Cushing was talking about. So big thanks to Tammy there. All right, so folks, we're going to switch gears now. So we're going to go into fire season. We have Nathan Hall with us, and Nathan mentioned before, he's a county ranger in Northeast Kentucky, and he does a lot of different things. But Nathan, one of the many responsibilities that you have is trying to help our communities deal with the wildland fire.
You know, the mission of the Kentucky Division of Forestry is to protect, conserve, and enhance forest resources of the state, you know, through an informed public and for environmental, social, and monetary reasons. So Kentucky Division of Forestry was established in 1912 for the sole purpose of reforesting the state of Kentucky and preventing and halting forest fires. So that's, kind of what we do on a daily basis. So I can go.
That's good, Nathan. I was going to say it's pretty interesting to think 1912. I wonder what the Kentucky landscape looked like then. Kind of what that.
Vastly different. If you look at pictures of Kentucky from the turn of the century, early 1900s, what is now forested land was most of it had been clear cut and burned repeatedly, and crops had been raised on it and had been tilled with mules, and people raised corn on the side of the mountains, and it was highly eroded. Yeah. And as people moved off and the forest came back, partly through the efforts of Division of Forestry, by replanting and everything, now we have the forest we have today. And we actually have more trees in the state now than we did at that time, which most people find hard to believe.
I know that's a really interesting fact. And I think it's really important to remember that these forests are always changing, right? They're very dynamic and changing. And, we can have a big impact on that direction. So, Nathan, we've had other folks from the Kentucky Division of Forestry on here before, and we thank you all so much for all you do. You all do a whole lot for our landowners and the forest resources of Kentucky. And for that, we really, really are appreciative. So thank you for that. And I'll shut up and let you tell us more about wildland fire season.
All right. So, February 15th is the beginning of our spring fire season. It goes from February 15th until April 30th. It's also in the fall of the year from October 1st until December 15th. And during those times in the state of Kentucky, it is illegal to burn between the hours of 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. unless you're over 150 feet from the woodlands. And the reason for that is, during those times of year, the leaves are off the trees, they're on the ground, they're more susceptible to sun and wind, and are more available to burn. Typically, we have lower humidities during that time of the year, and that's when we have most likely to have wildfire. The reasons the hours are from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. is because typically after 6 p.m. in the evening, the winds die down, the relative humidity comes up, the temperature drops down, and fires are less likely to spread. Coincidentally, most areas of the state that have routine garbage pickup typically have less wildfires, because most of our wildfires, 9 out of 10 wildfires, are actually started by people. So that can be through illegal debris burning, illegal garbage burning, accidental fires from power lines. So there's a lot of different things that cause wildfires. But a point of interest is that, it is illegal to burn garbage, any man-made material, and we still have a lot of wildfires that are unfortunately started by escaped debris fires. The only thing that is legal to burn in the state of Kentucky under our laws is brush, woody plant material, paper, things of that nature. If it's man-made material, then it's basically illegal to burn. What I tell people is if it puts up black smoke, it's illegal to burn. So, and a lot of municipalities have their own burn laws that supersede, that are more strict than our burn laws, because our burn laws for the state, counties, municipalities can enact burn laws that are more strict, but not less strict. So like I live in northeastern Kentucky, and the city of Ashland is a high pollutant area that has further restrictions based on EPA guidelines. So they have even more stringent burning laws than what the state has. So based on where you live, if you have landowners who are wanting to burn property off either through clearing ground or things like that, have them check the local laws for their areas they live in. Excuse me. So the thing with our fire season is we try and do a lot of education and public outreach locally. Me as a county ranger, I do a lot of school programs. So I go to local schools, local K through 12 programs, 4th grade field days, things of that nature, and try and stress the importance of preventing wildfires. Now, it's really a lot of fun working with children doing these education programs, because I get to hear about a lot of fires that mom or dad or grandma or grandpa accidentally let out, and they tell me that they saw me and my dozer there putting out the fire. So I get to find out where all the fire bugs live that way. But anyway, it's really a lot of fun working with those kids and, explaining the importance of why it's important that we put out fires. And I usually start with them, just a real basic breakdown of fire itself and, the fire triangle. And basically, a fire has to have 3 things in order to burn. It has to have fuel, has to have heat, has to have oxygen. You take away any one of those 3 things and the fire goes out. So, and I usually incorporate this into how many people like to go camping? Well, most kids love to go camping and like to have marshmallows and s'mores at their campsites. And I relate it to putting out their campfire. So if you put dirt on a campfire, you're smothering it out. If you put water on a campfire, you're taking away the heat. That breaks the fire triangle. So what we do as wildland firefighters is typically we take away the fuel. So when a volunteer fire department gets dispatched out to a forest fire, everybody recognizes the big red trucks. They show up, lights and sirens blaring, and they spray water on the fires. Well, that works really great where you can reach the fires with water. Most times, though, by the time we arrive on scene, the fire is up on top of the mountain and we can't reach it with water. So we have to fight fire a little bit differently. And the way that we do that is by constructing a fire line. And a fire line is nothing more than a path of bare mineral soil that we cut through the leaf litter, through the leaves, through the grass, whatever the fuel type is, all the way around that fire, and then burn out that remaining fuel back to the main fire. So we fight fire with fire in essence, but we break that fire triangle by taking away the fuel. And that always gets a big response out of the kids. Like you set a fire inside of your fire line. And yes, that's the most efficient, safest way for us to get the fires extinguished, because we oftentimes can't get large amounts of water up on top of the mountains, to put the fires out. Where we can use water, we do, and it is a huge help. And we rely very heavily on our volunteer fire departments to assist us, especially around structure protection and initial response for the fires. When we are responding to fires, there's three main priorities on every fire, and those priorities are human life first, then property, and then the forest. So the life of the public, life of the firefighters, that's our primary concern anytime we get dispatched to a fire. So even before we get to the fire, we get the location, we get the call, whether it comes in from 911, whether it be from our aerial detection planes that fly around looking for fires during fire season, or whatever the case may be. We automatically pull that location up on a map, try and determine the structures at risk, the values at risk, any special hazards in the area, and also what the terrain and the fuel type might be like. And once we arrive on scene, then we further triage the area, looking at the houses and improvements in the area, make sure that there is no human life in danger. And sometimes this can be landowners trying to put out the fires themselves, and as well as the firefighters from the volunteer fire departments and or other members of the public. So it's very important for us to know who is in and around that fire area once we arrive on scene, and we constantly assess that throughout the fire environment. Once we arrive on scene, then we typically join in what's called a unified command with the local fire departments. So we'll make contact with them, determine what actions they have taken, and then we will jointly determine the best course of action moving forward on how to safely and efficiently put out that fire. So it's very important as landowners and homeowners to make sure that your property, your structures are fire resistant. Some different ways of doing this is making sure that, there's not a lot of brush around your home, your outbuildings, things that area, making sure you have defensible space around your home that limits the likelihood of your house catching on fire and burning in the event of a wildfire. Here in Kentucky, we're very fortunate that we typically don't lose a lot of structures. Other parts of the country, not so much. Most people think of wildfires, they think of the large Western fires, but wildfires occur anywhere that there's wildland fuels. I know since I've been doing this, I've been as far away as flat Alaska to the southern tips of Florida, North Carolina, California, all over the country fighting wildfires. And it's one of those things that we have a lot more fires than the public is generally aware of. The public generally only finds out about the large fires or the catastrophic fires or the fires where there's been some tragedy take place. For example, fire season started on February the 15th. We had been running fires since New Year's Day. We ran fires for about 2.5, 3 weeks before fire season started until it flooded last week here in Eastern Kentucky. So the weather conditions typically dictate the fires that we have. That's one of the primary reasons for fire is having hot, dry weather. And the fuels that we have here, the leaf litter and the grasses, are what we would consider 1 hour fuel. And so those dry out very quickly. Today, for example, I'm going to be on fire standby. Our aerial detection plane is going to be going up this afternoon looking for fires. we had about a 1/4 inch of rain last night. But by this afternoon, with the sun and the wind that's blowing, we will have fires this afternoon. So it always tends to take people by surprise how quickly we can have a wildland fire after a rain event. But it's just one of those things that the 1-hour fuels, leaves and grasses, things like that, they're called 1-hour fuels because it takes them a very short period of time to dry out. Now, your heavier fuels, your sticks, your twigs, your 10-hour fuels, things like that, up to your 100-hour fuels and 1,000-hour fuels, obviously it takes them longer to dry out. So last fall, we were in drought conditions, and a lot of those 10-hour fuels, 100-hour fuels, 1,000-hour fuels were igniting. On a day like today, your leaves and your grass, your 1-hour fuels will burn very rapidly. Your heavier fuels, not so much, but the rapid growth of fire is what typically causes a lot of accidents and tragedies to occur. So during our spring fire season, I mentioned our aerial detection plane. We do have a plane that flies on any day that we are likely to have wildland fire and look for fires for us. So we're notified not only by people calling 911, calling their local fire departments, calling our local offices. Also, our aerial detection plane will look around and fly over our area. And if they spot a fire, they'll give us a GPS coordinate of that area, a brief size up of the location and size of the fire, any structures at risk, and any points of access. And that helps our managers determine how many resources to send to that fire based on the size up from the plane. So if you have a fire near your area, just be aware the best way to contact us is typically through 911. Contact your 911 and they will dispatch local fire departments. And typically they are located much closer than we are. We're spread pretty thin. I think we're down to about 125 full-time employees in the state right now. So that we cover a lot of ground. But the local VFDs do a really good job and we rely on them very heavily. So as far as our fire season goes, like I say, it really just depends on the weather. Last fall, for example, we had a lot of wildfires and they were very hard to control. This time of year, typically fires are going to be easier to control because the heavier fuels are still wet. So we may go in and take us, a day to put out a 10-acre fire. Versus last fall, it would take us 2 or 3 days because that fire would continue to burn. The heavier fuels would continue to burn long after the main fire event is over. So one thing that we encounter a lot of times with landowners and the public is we will call a fire controlled when there are still active flames on the fire. And people are often confused by this. But once we construct our fire line around that fire, and we have a good hard black line and a good line down the mineral soil all the way around that fire, we make sure that everything along that edge is cold or cool and less likely to spread. Now, the interior of that fire will continue to burn oftentimes days after we leave that fire and call it controlled. But our primary concern is that exterior edge. What is likely to spread fire across our fire line? If it is not an endangerment to our line, then oftentimes, fires will be left unattended and we'll get phone calls days, weeks after the fact. Hey, this fire is still burning, when in fact that fire is controlled from our standpoint. So, and a lot of that has to do with location to the public. If it's visible from roadways, people call in a lot of times, if close to houses, things like that. So, excuse me. We have a lot of different cooperators that we work with during our fire season and throughout the year. Our local volunteer fire departments, I recommend everyone to support their local volunteer fire departments because these folks, they take time out of their day, out of their week, out of their lives, and they're volunteers, and they do everything they can to help. And so we work hand in hand with them on a daily basis. U.S. Forest Service, Kentucky Fish and Wildlife serves as a law enforcement liaison for us. Because we do have some law enforcement capacity, we can cite someone for having an escaped fire on their property, but we do not have arrest powers. So we work very closely with our local law enforcement officials and Kentucky Fish and Wildlife, who has arrest powers and arrest capabilities in case we need to have that happen on a wildfire. We also, several other federal agencies, Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and also with other states. So nationwide, there's a very small group of wildland firefighters, and they work for multiple agencies, states, federal agencies across the nation. And we have a compact with a lot of southeastern states. So within that group of states, if say Florida has fires and they need help, and they send out a message to the other states in the southeastern compact, we need bulldozers, we need engines, we need personnel. If any of the other states in that compact have resources available, they'll make them available, and then we would then travel to that state and assist with fires. And we do that every year. Like I say, we've been all over the South, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Texas, you name it, pretty much. And last fall, we actually brought resources in from out of state to assist with our wildfires here. So it's a collaborative effort, preventing and putting out wildfires. And so it makes it a lot safer for everyone if homeowners have their property in a state where it's easily defensible in the event of a wildfire. A lot of people love, living in nature, living in the forest and around the forest, but with that comes some responsibility, because if your house has wood siding on it, the gutters are full of leaves, you have leaves piled up against your house, you have firewood stacked against your house, and there's a wildfire nearby and there's no defensible space around that house, then it's very difficult for not only the first responders, the volunteer firefighters, and forestry officials when they arrive on scene. We don't want to see anyone's house burn. We don't want to see any loss of life. We don't want to see any loss of property. But people have to be responsible for their own property as much as possible, because firefighters in general, we typically want to be helpful. We want to help people. We wouldn't be in this profession. So if we arrive on scene, we're going to typically put forth more effort to save someone's house than we would the forest. Like say, we primarily, goals are life first, then property, then the forest. So acreage of property burned makes no difference to me as long as people are safe and their property is safe. So we don't want to see the forest burn per se, but that is, like I say, third on the list when it comes to priorities. Excuse me. So Billy just put up our website here that has all of the local information and information across the state. And let's see here. He's got on the reporting period for February 21st, 2023 in Carter County, had one fire with 1 acre burned. So nice to know. But we typically have several fires this time of year. Carter County does not have mandatory garbage pickup. There is still some people who burn their garbage, and in the event that we respond to a wildfire that is the result of people burning garbage, then we can typically call in Division of Air Quality, who has the ability to cite those people into court, and they are required to clean up essentially their illegal dump that they've burned to prevent from getting further fines. So excuse me. And see here, I was
going to say, Nathan, I was going to point out, I dropped the link to this page in the chat for everybody. But
on the Firewise program?
Yeah, well, not the Firewise, but this page we're looking at. But I did want to point out, you were mentioning the Firewise, and there was that resource for people to kind of learn more about what that means to make their property and their houses defensible.
Yeah. And one thing to remember, I did see one comment pop up about controlled burns. We have started last couple of years, started working with landowners to perform prescribed burns on their property. We're still not fully operational with that as much as we'd like to be, and a lot of that's due to the fact we just don't have the staffing to support it right now. We're working to assist landowners with controlled burns, because when I was growing up, it was pretty common for people to burn off their pasture fields, burn off sections of their woodlands, preparing seed beds, whether raising tobacco beds or whatever the case may be. And over time, that has gotten to be not as common. But not all fire is bad, and that's hard to explain to some people, because a wildfire is just that. It's wild, it's uncontrolled, it has no purpose, it's caused by accident or deliberately to cause damage, versus a controlled burn is done for a specific purpose, whether it be to reduce fuel loading of an area or to increase oak stands or to benefit wildlife habitat. There's a lot of specific plants and animals that actually do better in an area after a light burn has gone through, different types of wildfires and endangered species as well. But it's hard for a lot of people to understand the difference between a wildfire and a prescribed fire. But the basic tenet is, a wildfire is just that. It has no planning. It's not a planned event. And typically a wildfire will happen during the driest conditions when the most damage will occur, versus a prescribed fire is done during a proper prescription. Just like a doctor writes a prescription, it's done during a certain time of year, during a certain time of day, with a certain amount of fuel moisture to get a desired effect.
Right.
So, but the public in general, it's hard to distinguish wildfire versus prescribed fire. So, and me typically throughout my career, most fires I've dealt with have been escaped wildfires, and so we're just now kind of getting into the prescribed fire into things, and I think it is a good thing. And like I say, we're still learning about it, and we're still learning how to assist landowners that want to do prescribed fire in the proper way.
And you bring up some good points there, Nathan. I was going to say, I did point out, and I'd like to highlight for people on that link I sent right there, is the Kentucky Prescribed Fire Council. If you want to kind of get more information about that, I know they've been working. We had Jacob Stewart with Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resource Office talking about some of the control burn workshops that they've been putting on for landowners. So, if you're a landowner and this is something of interest to you, just pay attention, because we've got some of these resources. Check out the Kentucky Prescribed Fire Council. Nathan, I don't know if you saw the rest of that question. There was a nice question about any thoughts for landowners on maintaining fire breaks like logging roads on ridges and property lines.
Well, at one time there was some cost share available for maintaining fire breaks on landowners' property through EQIP and some of the other programs. But a landowner that has, a four-wheeler, a side-by-side, a tractor, anything like that, can maintain their own fire breaks once they're established, with a grader blade or with a leaf blower, any way to keep that down to bare mineral soil around their property. So, and if you live in a fire-prone area, then I would definitely, look towards doing that, because, like I say, we have some traditional arson areas in Carter County that typically burn every year, every couple of years, and we know these are hot spots. And we've had landowners that have, where we went in and created fire breaks, that landowners have then taken them over to keep them up so that their property does not burn. So.
Right. That's good. That can help for sure. And Nathan, you covered a lot of ground. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedule. And while many of us are maybe excited about, I'm looking out my window right now, and 70 degrees is or 72. My computer said outside. It's supposed to be over 70 tomorrow. So I think we all need to kind of keep you all in mind out there, that when these conditions get ripe like this, I was so surprised to see 139 fires already in Kentucky this year. So I'm sure y'all will be busy over the next few days.
Oh yeah, I guarantee it. We've had a pretty dry winter for the most part, so that's the reason why. So we're going into spring fire season cocked and loaded, if you will.
Well, you all please be safe, right? When we think about that life, I want to think about your all's lives as well. So make sure you all are looking out for one another out there. And thank you all. It's dangerous work that you all do to try to keep our woods and our folks and the property they own safe. So a big thanks from all of us to you all for all the great work you all do.
I appreciate it. It's like I say, this line of work, folks either love it or they hate it. They don't stay in it very long if they don't love it. I mean, so, it's one of those things. I kind of relate it to a chess match and a marathon at the same time, because when you're fighting fire, I mean, it's very physically demanding, and you also have to be one step ahead of the fire and weather conditions and everything all at the same time. So it's and you can guarantee, if you have a date night planned with your wife, you're going to have a fire. If you have a birthday party coming up, you're going to have a fire. So the most inopportune time for your personal life, that's when you'll have a fire.
Yeah, and I know you all kind of put your personal lives on hold for to go out there and fight these fires. And where many of us may be running away from the fires, you all are rushing toward them. So thank you very much.
Right. Thank you very much. Appreciate y'all having me on.
And we'll have you again, Nathan. And as always, a big thanks to all of the folks in the Kentucky Division of Forestry for the great work they do across the state. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, folks. So we covered a lot of ground today. We learned about Woodland tax tips. So, a lot of ways to save yourself some money and make sure you're doing things legally as well. And Dr. Cushing shared a lot with us on that. We'll be getting more information out about those Woodland tax tips real soon. We have an e-news coming out real soon that'll have some details and additional links for that. The recording should be available within a week or so as well. Also learned a lot about the spring wildland fire hazard season, which is going on right now through April 30th. So it's something we all need to be cognizant of and make sure that we're taking care of the woods. We don't need to be sending Nathan and these other fine folks out there unnecessarily. So let's try to be careful out there as we go forward. We're going to have a few warm days. So I know people can get excited, want to go get busy and get active, clean these fields up. Just make sure you're doing it the right way and be protective. But we're going to go ahead and close today's program. And thank you all so much for being with us. Really do appreciate it. I know you could be doing a lot of different things, but you chose to be with us for that. Thank you very much. If you ever have any questions or things you'd like to see about Kentucky's woodlands or wildlife or natural resources, please let us know. You can visit us from FromTheWoodsToday.com. We have a little survey link there where you can input questions, or you can also even upload images of maybe crazy things you've seen out in your woods, and we'll try to get to those. But thank you all so much for being with us. Please let others know about this show and this program. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of recordings available on a wide variety of topics. So if you're struggling with something on your property, your woodlands, there's probably a video that's addressing that. So we'll look forward to seeing you all again next week. Renee Williams will be back with us then. Until then, I hope everyone has a great week. Bye-bye.
From the woods today.